Hi there everyone, my name is Rebecca McConnell. I am an architect and PhD candidate at Queen's University Belfast, and today I'm going to talk you through my presentation on how can architects serve the climate crisis. So a little bit about my research. I started looking at climate change and its effects on our architecture and built environment back in 2016 during my master's. And then whenever I finished my master's, went into practice, and I've decided that because the topic's so close to my heart that I've decided to come back and continue with my research on the topic. My research methodology is research by design, which basically means that at the end of my PhD, I'll have a series of design outcomes. And that'll be my method that I choose to follow through with my research. So resources, I use a series of different resources, these range from books to podcasts, to TV shows, documentaries. I even have one that I just keep sort of on my desk, the second one in there, that I just read whenever to have on my person. And why am I doing it? The things that we're facing at the minute, the global risks in terms of impact and likelihood for 2020. You can see a lot of them, the trend there is that a lot of them are green. They're all environmental, the majority of them are environmental, and they're to do with biodiversity loss, extreme weather, and climate action failure. So in order to look at this in a sort of critical manner, I need to look at other topics such as urbanisation, because it's going to be the cities that are affected by these climate change consequences. So by the year 2050, it said that 2/3 of us will live in an urban environment, which has never happened before. Whether or not the coronavirus changes that statistic, I'm not sure. So the consequences of climate change are all your sort of obvious answers. So you have your sea level rise, temperature increase, and demographic shift, along more. And we're really faced with a crisis that threatens our survival as a species, and yet we're continuing to act in the exact manner that has caused the crisis. So sea level rise is something that I started researching in my master's, and you can see that every continent is going to be affected by it. And obviously, particularly in Europe, that's something that I sort of zoomed in at in the more micro scale. And in the island of Ireland, all the major cities in the island of Ireland will be affected by sea level rise. And you can see here on these maps that accounts for 35% of the island's population. So everyone will be extremely affected by it. So why are we not doing anything about this problem? Climate change is defined as a wicked problem. So what is a wicked problem? It's a complex issue. It defies definition. There's no final solution. Any resolution generates further issues. And it said that the solutions cannot be true or false, good or bad, but the best that can be done at the time, which is something that I'm channeling in my own research. So just whenever I was trying to explain in terms of a diagram how complex the issue is, I created this climate change wheel. So you can see the topics coming off climate change, and then each topic has its own subtopics, and everything's sort of interconnected. And once you bring one of the elements of the subtopics into the center, so for example cities and urbanisation, you can see that it spawns its own series of issues beyond that. And on the right hand side here, I've just shown where there's overlaps, and you can see just how complex the issue of climate change really is, especially when it's meshed together with cities and urbanisation. So design is said to be a solution for a wicked problem, because it's playful, It's iterative, and it sort of has a fluidity. It can go between being very specific or generic, and it really engages with the messiness of everyday life. So that's something that I'm going to bring forward into as a method to sort of solve a wicked problem or help a wicked problem, as it were. At the minute, I'm looking at the city of Dublin. So you can see here a diagram just showing sort of worst case scenario sea level rise and how it will be affected. And one of the approaches that I'm taking to in my design is a temporal approach. So looking at the architectural solution over time, and looking at different things like the jobs that will be created, how we're going to be living our lives, and from that, you can see that people are going to be displaced, and they have this element of memory and nostalgia. Because architecture has the ability to summon memories, to induce nostalgia, and even trigger emotional reactions. So we have to keep in mind this sense of place whenever we're looking at climate refugees. So representation, I'm not sure if you can tell, but throughout my presentation, all these drawings have sort of been my own, and they're my way of sort of representing my design solutions and assessing the problem. And I always find it's a really, really sort of methodical way of working through the problem and coming up with an answer. And in order to do this, you have to be a little bit of a futurologist, because obviously you're looking into what's going to be happening, how we're going to be living. And this image on the right here, zoomed in, is actually one that I created in 2017, but it's very apt at the minute. It's looking at quarantine and this idea that whenever you're displaced, you're placed into quarantine. So how I'm recording my research is on a blog called The Future Blueprint. And this is just something, it's quite personal to me, but it is accessible, and it sort of just is a way of me archiving a lot of my writing and drawings, and just from that I wanted to say thanks for listening, and the link to the blog there is at the bottom, and my email address is just above it. And if you have any questions or anything else, don't hesitate to give me a shout. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Maurizio Sibilla. I am a Senior Research Fellow at the School of the Built Environment at Oxford Brookes University. In the next few minutes, I'm going to introduce a piece of research developed by me in collaboration with my colleague, Dr. George Bloomberg, within the framework of the Construction Network Plus program, which is funded by the UK Research and Innovation through the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. As an introduction, I would like to share with you the following question: what characterizes the future energy infrastructure? We sustained that the future energy infrastructure will be characterized by distributed, renewable, and interactive energy system, called DRICE herein, where the future generation of building will act as a main component of this network. However, this is a completely new form of infrastructure. Therefore, it is not sufficient to explore the technical aspect of this apparatus, but we need to explore the social technical implications and the capacity of the local stakeholders to put DRICE into practice. This is done by developing an appropriate technology support net. Technology support net is composed of different stakeholders with different scopes and objectives. They are called to work together in order to enhance the emergent socio-technical properties of this new system. This process involves both academics and non-academic stakeholders in writing the rules to achieve the vision of buildings as energy service at the local level. In order to understand this vision, as a first step, we have elaborated an innovative conceptual framework which provides a unitary framework concerning the concept of buildings as a component of a future energy infrastructure. The novelty of this framework is to clarify the relationship between the trajectory of innovation, new forms of management and tools, and the social technical implications related to drives which impact on industry and civil society. Our exploration has also involved a case study collection. These case studies, belonging to the Energy in Buildings and Community program funded by International Energy Agency, represent the most advanced projects related to technological and social innovations. These projects show how to develop a niche of innovations at the local level to introduce new practices and to contest the resistance of the old regime. We have elaborated an association between the line of research pointed out by the conceptual framework and the case study analyzed, revealing that the technological innovation in terms of devices has received more attention with respect to the social innovation related to drives. This is one of the most important barriers to achieve a citizen-centered energy system and thus self-organized energy community. In order to contrast this barrier, the information collected from literature and case study has been used to develop a toolkit for knowledge integration and exchange. This toolkit can be used by academics and non-academic stakeholders to explore the concept of building as energy service, point out what type of contribution can come from their expertise, but within a shared framework. This tool has been disseminated as open educational resource. Instructions are now available at the Emerald Open Research platform. Thank you very much for your attention.
Good morning, I am Alessia, Master Graduate Architecture student, and I will present you my thesis research titled TIUM, Tierra Húmeda, a species coexistent urban model for vulnerable basins, the case of Tierra Amarilla, a gold mining town in Copiapó River Basin, Atacama Region, Chile. Introduction. Copiapó Basin belongs to planet semi-arid surfaces, although it is characterized by the widespread presence of waterways. Climate change and water overexploitation by agribusiness and mining made the Copiapó River Basin subject to growing water scarcity. The drought crisis affected the river ecosystem and the cultivated fields. The effect is evident and calls for the regeneration of the aquifer mesh. The term indicates the water network in surface and underground rift form. Water in fact moves downward from the plateau to the coast, in the riverbed, in the irrigation channels and in the streams, and vice versa moves upward as desalinated water in the aqueducts. Despite the recent drought crisis, water continues to be a pervasive element of Copiapó River Valley, especially in the low sectors. It generates situations of humidity for a balanced ecosystem. However, the ecological equilibrium is evenly threatened in other sectors. This research therefore proposes strategies to recover contaminated water flow for the sustenance of the wetland located in the basin and agricultural practices. Water crisis in the basin. The water crisis is mainly due to the massive extraction of groundwater by industrial agriculture since the 80s, when neoliberal economic model in Chile started promoting privatization of water use rights, favoring the export industry to the treatment of local communities. The situation of the basin is very critical. If the water exploitation continues with this level of extraction, the river flow will drop to 2,000 liters per second in 2040. Though mining activity will be progressively supplied by desalinated water, this measure would not be enough to restore the water balance and the associated ecosystem. Furthermore, liquid waste would not recover in the mining process will continue to be stored in tailing dams with a high risk of contamination of streams in the case of alluvial islands. The situation of Tierra Amarilla in the plateau is particularly critical, where the effects of mining and agro-industrial presence manifest together. With the first, which has modified the topography with its tailing deposits and has generated changes in the atmospheric condition of the place, and the second has contributed to the overexploitation of water tables. The research aims to include these negative factors in territorial strategies to regenerate the life of the place in its different forms. As Martin suggests, this implies to replicate the ecological thinking as an open view on the multiple factors which constitute the place. Tium Agropark, a species coexisting urban model for Tierra Amarilla. So the research project aim is to test how the hydric strategy involving contaminated water surfaces could take shape in Tierra Amarilla as a different anthropic occupation model characterized by humidity. The site current situation suggests to link the disused tailing dam El Buitre and the dry agricultural area with a canal for a recoverable water flow of at least 50 liters per second. 5 main project operations would lead to generate a human agropark supported by phyto-purified water. Operation would be the transportation of contaminated water, the contaminated water treatment in phytodeparative filters, the water canalization through crops, the domestic grey-water treatment in the aerobic phytodeparative filters, and finally the aquifer recharge to infiltration. The strategy would provide a total aquifer recharge of 18 liters per second and possibly irrigated agricultural area of 40 hectares. This intervention, necessary to activate the watershed and restore the humid condition, implies a technical element, but also a possibility of inhabiting these places by vegetation, humans, and other species. So the watershed, with its human soil thickness, carries water from the rocky slope to the riverbed. To sum up, the general strategies would involve 4 main actors of the basin to face the main conflict, and we aim to reestablish the hydric balance. With the basin considered an interconnected ecological system, it is possible to integrate the existing water cycle with industrial contaminated water to recover the river wetlands. In the sense, the project discusses on how an artificial water system could contribute both to the recharge of the aquifer and to restore that humidity condition suitable for a species coexistence. Thank you very much for the attention.
Good morning, my name is Jacopo Galli and I'm a postdoc research fellow at Università U di Venezia and associate researcher at Fondazione Enrico Mattei. Today, I will be presenting a paper titled Retracing Reconstruction, Establishing an Analytical Drawing Method for the Comprehension and Systematization of Urban Metamorphosis Following Extreme Events. The term urbicide, the fundamentally illegitimate form of modern conflict in which a urban population is targeted for destruction, was used to describe the destruction following the modernization processes in the 60s and first applied to war contexts in the 90s during the Balkan Wars. Today, the militarization of cities has become an ongoing global condition, and urbicides have increased in scope and number. But if someone destroys, others must reconstruct. However, a huge knowledge gap exists in the analysis and systematization of processes of urban metamorphosis following conflicts, large-scale social problems, or natural disasters. A comparative study of past cases, highlighting similarities and differences, allowing for a critical assessment, has never been fully developed. It is fundamental to define an analytical method allowing not simply to understand the past, with its processes of decision-making and morphological metamorphosis leading to the current urban settings, but most importantly, to transform it in an operative tool for the definition of future strategies of intervention. The work of Leonardo Benevolo on the San Pietro Square, published in Casabella in 1990, provides a precious methodological approach. The research matches historical analysis with critical redrawing, allowing to comprehend the evolution process that has led to the current urban setting. The tools to be used are not those of the architectural historians that tend to focus on the artistic and poetic values without trying to retrace the operative steps that have led to the final configuration, but rather those, analytical and operative, specific to designers. Benevolo individuates three key moments in the history of the urban complex: the arrangement of the piazza before Bernini's project, the completion of the colonnade with the definition of the ovoidal square operated by Bernini between 1662 and 1670, and the current conditions following the construction of Via della Conciliazione by Marcello Piacentini, completed between 1937 and 1950. The three phases are not only described and documented with significant archive materials, but are also drawn at the same scale and with the same type of visual representation, in order to eliminate the discrepancies given by the different drawing styles. This type of analysis allows to understand the reasoning behind each design decision, but cannot be explained through the simple observation of the current state of the urban environment. The final drawing overlaps the condition before Piacentini's intervention with the current one, showing with three simple colors the complex entanglement of urban continuities and breaks. The red buildings are unchanged in the two time frames, the yellow are the demolished, and the blue the reconstructed, while the hatched yellow and blue shows the buildings that were reconstructed on areas previously occupied by other buildings. The sum of these layers allows to define a powerful tool for the comprehension of the urban metamorphosis, allowing a trained eye to understand in a single glimpse a complex design history. The application of this drawing method to the historical case studies is possible through the retracing of archival materials documenting the condition in specific time frames. As an example, for the City of London, the London County Council bomb damage maps. Our focus here is on the Cripplegate area, a dense medieval urban pattern north of the Thames River made of low-rise row houses. The area was effectively erased from the map on the evening of 29th of December 1940 during a Luftwaffe blitz that completely destroyed the historical pattern. The reconstruction strategy was to completely alter the pre-war urban pattern, but was substituted with the brutalist building that form today the Barbican complex. It is a complete paradigm shift with a new infrastructural system and the substitution of low and dense elements with high-rise buildings. The overlay of the two time frames, defined as transformation map, clearly shows the process of urban metamorphosis that allows the few historical permanences, such as the small Saint-Gilles church, to interact with the later intervention, allowing to visualize the complex dialogue made of substitution, alteration, and stratification. The drawing method, derived from Benevolo work, can be applied to a number of case studies in order to understand the different ways in which the urban form has been altered during and after conflicts. At this stage, the chosen case studies are European cities destroyed during World War II. It is possible to visualize how the design and planning approaches to similar problems have been radically different. From the as it was where it was, extended from the single monument to the urban scale in Italian and German cities, to the radical planned modification of the urban form in France and the UK, to a complete refoundation caused by political reason in Spanish pueblos adoptados. The transformation maps, seen side by side, allow to visualize the variability of urban metamorphosis and confront them in order to construct interpretative categories and underline similarities and differences. The analysis, now limited to word extraction, can be broadened to many other categories of urban pressure. This may allow to understand if and how the different types of destruction influence strategies of reconstruction, while allowing to assess the results of the different strategies in a short, medium, and long time frame. As an example, the two cities of Nicosia on the island of Cyprus and Muharraq in Bahrain show how different problems can be analyzed through the same drawing approach. The two cities have not experienced major traumatic and violent events in their recent history. But on one side, the division between Turkish and Greek urban areas, and on the other, the modernization processes following the discovery of fossil resources have led to major urban modification. The quantity and scope of building substitution is impressive, while particular conditions, such as the establishment of a divisive no-go zone or the alteration of the coastal line, can be traced and represented. The transformation maps allow to confront the different conditions and assess if the applied planning and design strategies have been successful in tackling the urban pressure specific to each area. The next step in the research is the definition of a monitoring questionnaire that will allow to confront in numerical terms the different reconstruction processes. The results of the questionnaire will allow us to categorize reconstruction strategies and define their strengths and weaknesses. The development of this organized knowledge is a foundational element towards the definition of innovative intervention strategies, with the final goal of establishing that science and the art of reconstruction already invoked by Patrick Geddes more than 100 years ago at the end of World War I. Thank you.
Today, there is a worldwide fear of disasters related to climate change, which the media greatly profits from showing us, with experts speculating on their causes. The forest fire was caused by a glass bottle, the drought is caused by the fossil fuels melting the ice caps, and the floods, coronavirus is to blame, or the banks, it's the refugees, the government, and so on. Everyone is busy chatting about these relative causes, like links of a chain. But if we keep following them, like a curious child, we may end up asking, what is the cause of all of this? Then we cannot find one physical thing. We have to go beyond all, to a single unitary cause. As the early Christian theologian Dionysius the Areopagite wrote, the preeminent cause of every object of sensible perception is none of the objects of sensible perception. Within every one of these disasters, the cause is also the solution. Modern cities have been growing without an inbuilt consciousness of the cause of all of this. Expanding megacities crisscross the globe, agglomerations of diverse communities with collective personas, legal and corporate personas, and national personas. We have got used to fighting against the natural world and against our neighbour. We think that resisting is the way to survive and grow, and so our landscape has been consumed by these megacities, in which environmental degradation like a cancer spreads internal structural chaos in the physical world. The healthy analogies of the natural world are missing for billions of us within the urban sprawl. There must be a way to return to a life where natural phenomena are part of a coherent ordering principle. Consider how social media connects us instantly with the other side of the planet, and satellites show us our Earth as one precious blue pearl in space. We can see that everything is connected. Consider the natural landscape as the timeless elements of this universe, the earth, water, air, and fire. This is where architecture, in a very humble way, can help us to remember the intangible cause within the tangible world, because it is built from the same elements that compose our universe. Architecture is a mute medium. Its power is through analogy, experienced with all the senses by total immersion. We are usually unconscious of this continuous transmission because we believe that architecture is merely functional, yet we spend almost all our time in buildings, and their effect molds our cognitive vocabulary. We must understand that the hand, as well as the eye, has its reveries and its poetry, wrote the 20th century scientific philosopher Gaston Bachelard. Meditated upon from the perspective of its depth, matter is the very principle that can dissociate itself from forms. Meditation upon matter cultivates an open imagination, he wrote. When the hand of the maker humbly touches the material, it transmits its message to him directly. The very ancient practices of masonry architecture affirm a continuum of the seen and unseen world, based on the concept of the work made without hands. To find out how work like masonry building could be a work made without hands, we must enter the mason's experience. Of all the traditions of making, it is masonry that is most often associated with an initiatory process, and it is also the most ancient, dating back to 10,000 BC, in training the person step by step towards an enlightened, mature consciousness. One might call this the mother of all arts, because it is the only art which contains human presence. To the mason, the center must become an experienced principle, not just a visual image. Starting with the center and the perimeter, the right philosophical relationship is set up with the earth and with the human being as a collective body. When the mason picks up the bricks or stones or earth to build, he places them around a perimeter, but always with a unitary center in mind, in heart, and in practice. Through that action, he builds a space, a dome, and that domed space becomes the space of the mason's life, containing an instructive message that he absorbs with all the senses. The entire training of the apprentice to become a master builder is to learn humility and love towards the earth. No other way will advance his skill, because that earthen material must be in repose within gravity in order to stand firm in the forms of arches, domes, vaults, apses, and all of their possible combinations and variations, which have built great monuments, civic buildings, humble homes, and whole cities. The mason has to focus, to attune himself totally to this natural earth material. He is not resisting anymore. He is not imposing his will. He is not in charge. He is attuning himself as a mystagogic practice to his material and asking it, where do you want to go? When he learns to listen, he finds that it seems to fly into place. I have seen this happen in many workshops of building domes and vaults with students, that at a certain point the resistance is gone. A student told me once, it's as if the dome wants to build itself. For the mason, after a long apprenticeship of heavy lifting, where his muscles feel the pain of resisting, there comes a point where his body harmonizes with gravity and the unitary center, and he reaches repose. The mason encloses what is bodiless within the limits of the body, because with only tangible materials he makes a place for the intangible to dwell. The mason's mind cannot be moving this way and that when his total focus is required, and as long as he is building his arches, vaults, and domes, he has the chance to practice and perfect this art. The sense of balance is felt not only by the builder, but also by those who inhabit the dome. When the last keystone is in place, the people who use the space experience how it rings true like a bell, where they hear the echo of their voice. Then we can say that it is a work made without hands. It teaches by analogy through the senses and guides the development of good character. It supports a person in spiritual disciplines in other areas of life, and certainly it teaches the building of cities. Buildings composed of arches, domes, and vaults may be built by a mason listening to the earth, but they are always in harmony with all the elements, with the wind and sun, with the principles of air movement and energy movement through the unity of the elements. This brief presentation is not proposing that we build all cities with domes, but simply to introduce the essential vocabulary of masonry architecture, which has made traditional cities and I hope will make futuristic cities. It can integrate with our present economy through housing and guide an internal transformation. It is one example of how architecture can build our collective body to avoid disasters, so that perhaps we may find that sustainability and ease which is given to a friend of God, and we may live at home in this earth. Thank you very much.
Hello, let me introduce myself. My name is María Ignacia Lucares, researcher from Environmental Architectural Material Exploration Laboratory. And our proposal is to transform ourselves. The current sanitary crisis that we are globally facing has accelerated a wide range of issues and problems related to the reproduction of our consumption culture. One of these problems takes our relation with industrial objects, especially plastic ones. In this sense, from the pandemic mitigation efforts, a large increase in the demand of plastic products has been detected to protect citizens, patients, and health workers. Objects like masks, gloves, medical lab coats, glasses, and facial masks faced on exponential growth in the demand, and according to that, the amount of plastic waste has been multiplied. What can we do with this plastic waste? The new industrial production paradigms based on eco-design and circular economy methodologies have raised like a viable way between many production politics in the world. However, design and development products and objects from recycled materials continue to be an urgent challenge. According to Recycling to Transform, limiting virgin raw materials as much as possible is an aim that will allow us to revalue plastic waste as a secondary raw material, open to the redesign of our material culture, based on repair, modification, and adaptation. Within the possibilities of exploring and understanding a recovery of plastic waste to the production cycle, our research is part of a design process for a new architectural materials, taking as a first parameter the mechanical recycling process of different types of plastic obtained from the post-consumer, and the stabilization of new materials with additives that enhance certain properties of new products. In this sense, the transformation of these processes are enunciated within an interdisciplinary area, which involves new methodologies and techniques. To follow the line of revaluation of materials and products in search of a comprehensive transformation of the product. LEMA is a laboratory of environmental architectural material exploration. In this laboratory, we give an opportunity to waste materials, incorporating architecture, design, and chemical engineering to create new forms and functions from the materialization of new products. As you can see, we use the mechanical recycling process, such as crushing, washing, drying, extrusion, pelletizing, pressing, thermoforming, and injection, to obtain a new functional and recycled product. Finally, we incorporate eco-design methodologies to evaluate the environmental impact in the different stages of the product. By exploring and understanding the opportunity that plastic waste has for the production cycle, additives allow the enhancement of additional characteristics or properties to the new material, being able to grant a new environmental functionality to the architectural product, as the degradation of polluting gases through photocatalysis, for example. As you can see, the iteration in this exploratory process of creating a new material frame us to the possibility of researching the stabilization of the mixture together with nanoparticles, making a new nanomaterial with environmental functions. The assessment of the incorporation of these additives in thermoplastics, the stabilization and the dosage percentage are taken into account to ensure a stability and a minimum resistance compatible with the mechanical range. Well, in conclusion, highlights of the critical consumption of plastic used on pandemic invite us to transform ourselves from an exploratory and iterative process of trial and error. This path allows us an opportunity for the environment that entails the change of the definition of plastic as a waste. The incorporation of technologies such as mechanical process, nanomaterials, and eco-design allows to revalue plastic waste through the composition and materialization of new innovative products through interdisciplinary areas. Plastic waste has a potential for toxicity, and add to the slow degradation has been identified as a risk to human health and ecosystems. According to the cycle of this material, it's a real challenge transform the design methodology of new materials that will allow us to repair, modify, and adapt what exists. Thank you.